How's it guys, and welcome back to another episode of Game on Garage. But actually, this is not just going to be an episode, this is going to be our first series, our gauge install series. So in the first episode, we're going to start off with the gauges and their wiring. So let's have a look at what we're going to use. So over the next few episodes, we're going to install these two Innovate gauges. Now I've got mine from fuelperformance.com, but you're welcome to shop around to get the best price you can. We're going to use our hole saw to cut the openings for the gauges. We're going to use some insulation tape for our electrical connections. We're also going to need some Teflon tape for where we install our oil temp and oil pressure gauge over here. Then there are going to be some terminals for our ground or earths. We're going to use a fuse holder with some fuses. Of course, we've got our gauges. On the left, we've got a Innovate SCG1. So that's a solenoid control gauge. It's got 4 functions. We've got a shift light, air fuel ratio, we've got a boost gauge, as well as an electronic boost controller. And on our right, like I mentioned, we've got an oil temp and oil pressure dual gauge. I believe it's an MXT. Of course, we're going to need to solder some connections. So we've got a solder iron, some solder, some spare wire if we're going to need that. We're going to need our multimeter to get a 12 volt on and off, etc. And some pliers just to cut the wires. So now that we're in the car, we've got these car panel trim removers to remove some of the panels to get to the wires we're going to need. Also, we've got our crimping pliers to strip some of the wires and crimp the terminals on there. And then lastly, we've got just a basic screwdriver set to remove all the things. We're also going to use our multimeter so we can test the wires to know when we've got a switch 12 volt, a proper ground, that would be easy. And then we're also going to tap into the headlights so that the gauge is dim when we turn on the headlights. Let's get to it. So after fiddling around for a while, and since I'm not going to be using the radio, as I suggest the gauges will be mounted in this opening over here, I got quite a few wires in here. It's actually quite a mess. But after searching around for a while, I found this plug, which I believe's got a ground as well as a 12 volt. So just to show you guys how it works, you're going to stick the negative of the multimeter into your suspected ground. If you're still searching for a ground, make sure you earth on the body, because the whole body of the car is a ground, since the negative lead of the battery goes to that. So I found a piece of metal here at the back, and you can just tap the ground into there. But since I know this is a ground, I can show you here as well. So put the negative on the ground and then search around with your positive lead until you get 12 volt. Now as you can see now, there's a little bit of voltage, but not a lot. That's since the ignition is off. When you turn on the ignition, you get your 12 volt. That means you have a switched 12 volt as required by the gauge. Otherwise the gauge is going to be running even when the car is turned off. But now, when you turn off the car, the gauge is going to turn off as well. So we've got our black negative and our orange and black positive here. Which also makes this easier is the fact that it's already got a connector on there that takes 2 spade connectors. So now you don't need to solder or tap into the wire, as you can just crimp your positive and grounds on the spade connector and then just insert it into your connector from the car. So let's get to that now. Now since we're working with the electronics of the car, remember to disconnect the negative terminal of the battery. Since we have to run the fuse, we're going to cut into our positive wire, the orange and black one. And then we're just going to solder our fuse holder in between those 2 wires so that there's a fuse running as well. So with the wires sprayed together and with your soldering iron hot, remember to not add the solder to the tip after tinning it, but to heat the wires and then add the solder to the wires themselves. And there we go, we should have a solid connection. Remember to either wrap it in heat shrink or insulation tape so you don't short out. Right, now to the next one. With both solder work complete and cooled down, we're just going to wrap them in insulation tape prevent a short, and then we can move on to crimping our new wires to the spade connectors. Look at that. Back to it. Okay, now I've got our fuse in. Let's get the connectors done. So the way these oil pressure and oil temp gauge work is you've got your switch 12 volts, your earth, which is the black wire, and then the white wire, which goes to your headlights, as explained earlier. Then both your sensors also has a earth. Now, the best way will be to combine all three of those earths in the same connector. And we're going to add the earth from our air fuel ratio and boost gauge in there as well. So with all four negatives connected, we can do the switch 12 volt or the positives as well. So get the two red wires from both gauges, remove the excess insulation, there we go, twist them together to sort of make one big exposed wire. Add them into the spade connection from behind, just so that they start to show at the other side. Get your crimper. We're using a yellow spade, so we're going to be using our 6mm or yellow crimper. And then I like to crimp them twice, once at the base and then just at the tip as well, to ensure that you've got a good connection. Give them a slight tuck to test them, and there we go. Now I can add both of these into our fused switch. Just make sure that you add the black gauge, the black spade connector to the black wires, and of course the red one to your 12 volts. Right, connect the battery and then we can test the gauges. Okay, so there's our gauges, and we turn on the ignition. They both turn on. Next up, we need to find our headlight dimming switch so that we can add the white wires to those. But so far so good. Nice. Alright, so to find the headlight switch, we're going to use our multimeter again. In the same configuration as before, I just tried to test a few of these plugs laying behind where the radio used to go. As I know, most radios also has a dimming function. So let's see if I turn on the headlights. There we go, 12 volts. Well, close to 12 volts, since the car is not starting. If I turn them off, we're back to 0. As well as with our park lights, 12 volts. Now this happens even when the car is off, and if we go to car on, we still got no volts, headlights on, we get our 10, 11, 12 volts. So again, I've got it lucky. I'm just going to use a spade connector, crimp my dimmer lights, the white ones, both gauges, dimmer lights into there, and we should be ready to go. Okay, not sure if you guys can see, but there we have the gauges both on. Maybe. And then when we turn on the dimmer lights or the lights, they dim. Not sure if it's clear on the camera, but trust me, they do. Okay, so that's the gauges ready to go. So that's going to be it for our first episode of our gauge install series. If you like this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and share it, as it really helps the channel out. If you're new, remember to subscribe so you can stay up to date with our whole gauge install series. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will be installing our boost gauge. So there's going to be the map sensor as well as the vacuum hoses running everywhere and the wires for that. In the meantime, remember, it's not game over, it's game on.
So Eckhart, how much boost are you running?
If you like this video, remember give it a good Stay tuned for the next episode where we will Stay tuned for the next episode where we will be. Stay tuned for the next episode where we Stay tuned for the next episode where we will be. That was close.